Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday to all. Sunday to those of you who observe. Those of you on the other side of the Pacific, that is. Let's see. Let's get into some questions. I always feel guilty when I don't get to everyone's questions. Joseph says that Chris Marin is no longer building Transformers. That's a shame. He made really nice Transformers, but it's a hard business with low margins, very tight margins, so I can understand that. Remember, everyone, please put question marks in front of any questions, and please only ask any one question the one time. You can ask as many questions as you like, but only the one instance of each, please. It makes it easier for me to find them in the thing, in the scrolling comments of doom here. Let's see here. Thank you very much, Jason Viator. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Can I talk a bit about the tone cap brands and materials used in JMP era Marshalls? Saludos to you too, Emilio. Well, in general, most of the coupling caps that you find in that period of Marshalls are going to be either the axial Phillips mustard caps, which are very nice caps, and then you will find some that are green chiclets and white chiclets, which are still being made today as Vichys. They're orange. And then later you get into the box caps, because JMP is a large time frame. In terms of materials, most of the resistors used in those amps are carbon films. Sorry, carbon films. Sorry, I can't think today. They're Iskras, and they're the other one, which I know the name of, but I can't think of now that I'm on a chat. Pyres and Iskras, and people pay an awful lot for those things, and they sound pretty much like any carbon film resistor. Just keep the wattage the same. The issue that we have with the older hand-wired Marshalls, and it's an issue that we have with older Fenders, is that the board layout, the spacing was done when resistor leads were all much longer than they are today. So sometimes it's hard to find a half-watt resistor that will span the gap on the board between turret to turret in the case of a Marshall, or eyelet to eyelet in the case of a Fender. So sometimes you may need to say, well, it was a half watt, but I need to go to a 1 or 2 watt just to get enough resistor lead length. I think that when people make clones of these models, it would be nice to shrink the dimensions of the board to modern component specs. People don't have to go out and source old Allen Bradleys and old Pyres and enrich people on eBay just to get something that fits. Hey, Christopher Butler. Bracing for a bit of a snowstorm. That's odd. It's actually crazy warm here today. It was cold yesterday. It's in the 70s today, and feels like we're about to have a hell of a storm. So let's see. Base Fox 11 4th. This was the first question asked, but it's only appearing now on my live stream. Good afternoon to you too. He recently purchased a THD Univalve. Notice a huge input mismatch between channels. Is this normal? Already tried different tubes. I had a Univalve a long time ago, 30 years ago. And I'm trying to remember, I think that they're just one, I think it's just the one channel, isn't it? With just a high and low gain input. So that would explain that. I would contact, it's a single channel, so it's just got to have a high gain input and a low gain input. And so that's what you're probably experiencing. The reason amps have that is if I plug a Strat into an amp, it has this much output level, so I'll use input 1, the higher gain. And then sometimes you'll grab a 335 or something, and the gain out of the guitar is so much higher that you get a broken up tone out of the amp. It's hard to get clean. So you go to the lower gain, it rolls off the volume of the guitar, so that when you go between a Strat and a 335 or a Tele and a Les Paul, the levels are closer. Or sometimes people will just play jazz and they don't want any breakups, so they like the lower gain input. The lower gain input also has a little bit less high-end extension. It's a little bit darker, a little bit smoother. So, it's not going to hurt anything to use either one. Whichever one sounds good to you is the correct one to use. on the idea of guitar level matching. I'm not a big fan of that. If I grab a Tele, I want the amp to respond to a Telecaster, and then if I switch to a Les Paul, I want that amp to want to break up and react differently. I like playing the amplifier by choosing the right source of the guitar. The whole thing works together. So I don't want to have a Les Paul with sparkling cleans just like a Strat has sparkling cleans. I want it to have a different character. But I'm weird that way. Hey, Chris, remember that weird issue with non-60, 120 hertz noise on my guitars, only when amps are plugged into mains, as opposed to battery-powered or headphone models? Solved. Okay, well, okay. I switched to fiber internet with optical to the router. That removed the coax grounding block and the ground plane of the neighborhood coax. My internet LAN is mostly wired, including studio. Okay, so you were getting fun ground and EMF and electrical noise fields in the house. It's very common. I've got a home security system, and if back when I did a lot of videos in the front of the house, the front room of the house, sometimes the guitar, sometimes the amplifier would pick up the noise fields from that panel for the home security system. And I'm good with electronics, but I didn't want to reinvent that particular expensive wheel. And I still sometimes will get hash from the Wi-Fi router here picked up on the amps on the bench. Usually you can't hear it in the videos, but you hear it in the room, just because how our ears work and versus how microphones and the internet works. But as I showed in that twin video, was it last week before? If you keep the tube shields on amps, you get less of that. But sometimes the field will just shoot right through no matter what you're doing. Hey, Wes, Alex, Mark, everyone. Let's see. Michael Easters from Prince Edward Island. That's great. If I don't call you out by name, that does not mean that I don't appreciate you being here. I just don't want to spend the entire chat doing a roll call. Tor asks, have I done a teardown review of the Friedman Little Sister 20-watt head? Thanks. I have not. I've not had the Little Sister in. I've had various runts and a couple of other models that I don't recall the names of. But yeah, every one that I've been in, I've had everything up to the BE 100. Every one that I've been in has been built very well and very consistently. He has basically two kinds of builds. He has the more hand-wired and he has the PCB, and each one is a great example of that kind of construction. And I would not expect to find any issues or weirdnesses if I did have a Little Sister 20-watt head on the bench. Dave makes good stuff, and I don't say that because he's my friend. One of the reasons I reached out to him and we've become friendly, and we're not friends, we don't hang out, but you know, if we were to meet up for a beer, we'd get along just great. One of the reasons I reached out to him in the first place is I admired his work. It's nice when I can say, call Brian from Top Hat and say, man, your amp was really built well. And I've had the same thing with I know I get the reputation for just shitting on amps and criticizing amps. I love it when an amp comes in. I'm like, hey, that's really good. And that can be a Suhr, that can be a Friedman, that can be a Metro, that can be a Germino, that can be a Top Hat, that can be a Dr. Z, that can be a Swart, you know. I love being able to say, this is well done at X price or even beyond X price, like the Vox AC 15 and 30 Custom Series. Phenomenal for the price. Yeah, if Wes, always reach out to me with email. I've been wanting to have your phone number for about 3 or 4 years now. Goody Guitars. Hey, Lyle, is it true that you can cut the leg of a cap and just leave it there? I've read about a mod for a Crate V16. You can, depending on if there's any voltage. If you have a capacitor which has, say, 320 volts on one side of it, and you hang it in the air, that capacitor really needs some path to ground on the other side for the DC to be fully blocked, and for the cap itself not to become a noise antenna. Now, if you don't have DC on one side of it, you can just lift one end or cut if you feel draconian and leave it up in the air. Like a bright cap on a Fender amp, or other amps like that, you can just lift one end and leave it physically in the amp, just disconnected. But if I wanted, say there was a cap that had 300 volts DC on one side, and I wanted to lift that cap, and because I didn't like what it did in the circuit, I would lift it and I put like a 1 meg resistor from the other lead to ground somewhere. So it's not in the circuit, unless it's, well, it depends. There are places where that could form a filter. So in general, when you're going to lift a cap, it's just a bright cap or something. So I was trying to be very thorough in my answer, and that just opens up a can of worms. Hey, Les Ghost, can I safely remove light surface rust from the metal parts on a 60s Fender amp, like the corners and chassis straps? Yeah, on the corners and chassis straps, get a Tupperware container, plastic container, and put them in there. And depending on your budget and how dedicated you want to be, you can use some very expensive stuff. I've got some rust dissolver, Evaporust, that I used on that Bassman from Hell. Was that a year and a half ago? But in general, for light rust, you can just put them in that container and then fill it with WD-40 and let it sit for 30, 40 minutes, and then wipe it off and kind of get rid of the oxidation on the top, then put it back in there. WD-40 does remove a lot of rust pretty well without doing any damage or scouring anything. Evaporust is fantastic, but it is expensive. Though, if you buy it, you can reuse it, and you only need to use as much as you need. When I did that video on rust removal on that Bassman, I got so many recommendations of using vinegar or various acids. Do not use vinegar or other acids for such things, because they will turn steel black. You will not have nice chromed, shiny hardware. You will have blackened metal with no luster whatsoever. Structurally, it's fine, but it's not what you want. Let's see. What's the worst I've ever been shocked? Aside from various recent elections, I think it was the time that I was reaching. It was an old Marshall from the mid '60s, and it had a an output transformer, where instead of having all the wires connected inside the transformer and then, protected by plastic, it had terminals where the wires were making contact with each other. And so the primaries were just, the metal connections to the primaries were exposed. And I was reaching across the amp, and I bridged I bridged them with my flesh, and I couldn't use my arm for about 30 minutes. And I invented some new interesting words. But I was not touching any other metal things, so I'm still here to say ouch. Hey, Mitch, the metalhead. He acquired a guitar that has dark oval spots on the fingerboard like unfinished ebony. Is naphtha safe on ebony and or rosewood? If not, what I suggest? It is safe, but it will dry out the wood. So if you use that to remove grease, you need then to add a natural oil. I would first suggest finding a good guitar fretboard conditioner designed for ebony and rosewood, and just doing clean it and then oil it and see if it evens out, because sometimes those dark spots don't show up when the fretboard is conditioned, but when it's dry, you get those color disparities. But yeah, naphtha is safe to use on those woods, but it will draw out any moisture and oil in the wood, which is in the short term bad, but you can then fix it. Brad has joined us. Hey, Brad. Brad is better able to answer that question in full than I am, because he consistently and currently does fantastic woodwork on guitars, and I have not done any serious guitar wood repair service in like 30 years. I do minor stuff, and I know the ropes, but I don't have fresh current knowledge as Brad does. Goody Guitars, I'm unfamiliar with that app, and I don't know what you would have to do or what you're trying to achieve. I'm sorry. Thank you, Joseph White. Have tried AC15CH. Some YouTube videos about AC15C1 suggest top boost EQ can sometimes affect normal channel, but not for me. Combo only feature of AC15C1 or total BS? No, the EQ is pretty much isolated on those. It will, to a very slight extent, but more so on the on yours than it would on the C. No, actually, they're the same thing. I was sorry. I was thinking there's a little more interaction in the hand wired because the channels are passively mixed. But on your AC15CH and the AC15C1, it's exact same circuit, totally circuit, and it's an active mixer done with an op amp. So the channels are really well isolated from each other. So I'm going to put that in mostly BS category. If you hear an interaction, it's really minor and not anything to think about. Actually, thinking about it a little bit more, you might. No, because the shared cathode is they're decoupled from each other. I've never experienced that at all, though you can. Pardon me. If you crank the treble on the top boost channel, a little bit of that hiss will be blended into the normal channel, even if you're using the normal channel only. But it's not anything to worry about. Hey, Sours Elvis is wondering about the tremolo in a deluxe reverb reissue that seems too strong with intensity. Is there any chance they use a 270K resistor? It's possible, but more likely that you just have a very strong tube in V5. It depends on the deluxe reverb reissue. The ones sold in the United States use an optical roach setup like the old ones, and those are pretty straightforward. Those sold in Europe and other parts of the world where they can't use that because it has cadmium or something, they've got a daughter board with a solid state tremolo in place of the opto tremolo. And so if yours is one of those models, there could be other factors there. But in general, a tube in V5 is much more likely to be the issue than a resistor change. But it's possible that you just have a resistor that's drifted a lot. You also might have a very, very intense pulse from your light, or a very, very weird LDR. So there are a lot of factors I can't predict from here. But the first thing I would do is try a different tube in V5. Hey, Lee, have I ever considered using a 3-piece knockout seal and a drop of blue Loctite to mount tagboard strips where can caps used to be in a Princeton Reverb? No, I would not trust blue Loctite to mount anything involving power. On the Princetons that I did that you saw past 2 weeks, I drill 2 very small holes, 1/8 of an inch, and I make sure that the spacing is correct. I've got a little template I print out and put on there. And those go to 1/2-inch aluminum standoffs, and I use stainless steel screws, and I mount the terminal board right there where they are. And so it's not intrusive, and I can bend the old multi-section can cap leads down so they're closer to being flush with the chassis, and there's a nice gap beneath the board. And that is a very easy professional way to do it, but I would never suggest using any kind of adhesive in place of screws. Hey, Paul Watson, what should I make for Valentine's Day dinner with my lady? It depends on what she likes to eat and how good a cook you are. I made a non-Valentine's dinner last night, but it was great. It was basically a chicken and rice and artichokes dish. That was just, you brown some chicken, and then you take the chicken out, and you add a little bit of olive oil to the pan, and you saute the onions, and then you put the rice, some red pepper flakes and whatever else spices. Then you add the rice to that, and pop the rice in that, and You add some chicken stock, put the chicken back in, and put artichoke quarters on top after you get all the choke out. And then you bring that to a simmer and you put a lid on it, put it in a 400-degree oven. When it's done, it's fantastic. You can also like Spain that up with some green olives, maybe a little olive juice, some nice porcinis or something, and then put that with a fresh salad. That'd be a nice Valentine's Day dinner, for I think. Or you can just do a steak, or depending on what she likes to eat. Find out what her favorite food is. But that's something that I did last night that would be a nice Valentine's Day dinner for most people, depending on which wine you have. My opinion about a couple of master volumes like Sundan amps using a 5-watt 200 ohm as the cathode resistor in the power amp, or another I seem like with 100K across the PI. I'm not sure what your question is, Greg. So they're varying. They're achieving a master volume by varying the cathode resistor. That seems like a noisy way to do it. You're probably going to have DC on that pot. I have not tried it. I've not seen how Sun has done that, so it may be good, may not be. But I have seen variations of master volumes where you have a traditional master volume that also changes either the cathode or the tail in the cathode circuit, in the phase inverter circuit. And I have thought that a lot of times people are trying really hard to be clever without achieving anything much or any better than a traditional circuit. So I'm skeptical, but I'm not going to cast stones at something that, unless I have the circuit in front of me to really look at and do the math. And it'd be even better to have an example I can hear and test on. Hey, Dead Amnesia. Speaking of quality, he's got an amplified Nation amp and he loves it. Are the high-end amps by Friedman, etc., really worth it over amps in the 2K to 2500K range, 2.5K range? Is that extra $1,500 worth? It's got to depend on you. And first of all, in terms of PCB versus hand-wired, no. A good PCB amp is as good as or can be better than a good hand-wired amp. But there are market pressures where if Dave wants to offer an amp with this many features in it, he knows that most guitarists want, at that price range, to achieve those features, expect it to be more hand-wired. So he does that because it doesn't matter if you build the world's best PCB, high-gain, do-it-all amp if people say, oh, it's PCB. And then they don't buy it. They don't even hear it. So he's playing both ends of the market because he's got to. It's a business, and it's an intelligent thing to do. But yeah, in terms of if the expensive Friedmans make different sounds than the less expensive Friedmans, and so you need to use the amp that gets the sound you want, whether that's a $1,500 Runt or a $3,000 BE100 or whatever it charges this week. So be it. And I think. Once the quality level inside the amp is at a certain point, and all the Friedmans are going to be at that point, hopefully all the amplified Nations are, then it's just, do you like the sound of it? It doesn't matter if it's the best built amp in the world if it doesn't give you the sound you're looking for. Hey, Martin Reed, what is the lifespan of caps in early Strats? It depends. There are 2 caps used in most early Strats. There are film caps, which do not last typically, but sometimes they do. There's no voltage present in a Fender Strat, so they're not failing because of voltage, but the materials themselves can degrade. There's also ceramic disc caps. Now those tend to last a long, long time, but they can become corroded, or if the amp is subject to the guitar is subject to extreme humidity over the decades, then the cap can absorb moisture from the air. But the earliest ones used film caps, sometimes waxed caps, and the later ones, most of the ones from the late 50s and 60s and 70s, used ceramic disc caps. Hey, Will, I would stick with, for a Classic 30, I would stick with just all JJs from a good tube vendor. You're not going to get any sound benefit of buying more expensive tubes. Expensive tubes are not always better tubes. Sometimes there's a correlation, sometimes they're not. But a Classic 30 is really hard on its output tubes, and there's not much mechanical support for them. So any EL84 can have a hard life in a Classic 30. So I would just go with JJ. So if you have to change them out every couple of years, you're not rebuying the amp in installments. I know what a knockout seal is, Lee. I just wouldn't trust those with Blue Loctite for this kind of thing. And it's nicer just to have two small discrete standoffs if you ever need to remove it. Many Princetons from the 60s had two little 1/8 inch holes. Some don't. So if the amp has two little professionally drilled and deburred 1/8 inch holes in the chassis there, most people won't even notice it. Hey, Canal de Senas. It's got an Egnator tweaker 15 watt with a good transformer. That's good. I like it a lot. Is it normal for the headroom to decrease by half when I use loop effects? Thanks from Lisbon. It's going to depend on what effects you're using in the loop. There are 3 levels that effects expect. Now, these are nominal levels. These are the levels that engineers have chosen to demonstrate these levels. They're never precisely that. There's negative 30 dB. That's called instrument. And that's what a pedal designed to be used with between the guitar and the amplifier, say a tube screamer. It expects negative 30. Then there's line level, which is negative 10 dB. And that is an unbalanced professional signal. And that's what you would expect to have on the output of an effects send. And so an effect which is going to be used in the loop of an amp would need to be designed typically to work at negative 10. And there's also a +4, which is professional line level, but that's balanced and is almost never used or encountered in guitar setups. So the issue, hey, Jeff McErlane, thanks for joining us. The issue is if you have an amp designed to be used, a pedal designed to be used between the guitar and the amp, say a delay pedal, it's designed to have enough headroom to accommodate a negative 30 dB signal. But then you put it between the send and return of an amp's effects loop, which is at negative 10, and it clips. It can't deal with it, and the pedal will squash that signal down. Now, I was looking at the word 1 on this screen. Some amplifiers have send and return levels for their effects loop, so you can turn the signal down from negative 10 to negative 30 to go to a delay pedal used for instrument levels. And then it has a return gain where it can make that back up, so you're back to the negative 10 level before it goes to the power amp. And they do that to varying levels of success and noise. There are modern pedals such as Strymons and some of the newer Boss stuff, and a lot of the better digital stuff can handle that wide range from negative 30 to negative 10, or you can calibrate them for a specific one. But if you have a mismatch in terms of the level, which I've discussed, and the impedance, then you can have big gain issues. Impedance is a deeper subject. Basically, the effects loop send needs to be low impedance so it can drive the pedals that we are designed for guitar, which are high impedance input devices, without loading down and losing highs and getting a weaker signal. But a lot of amplifier effects loops are passive, which means that they're just a high impedance loop and are pretty much useless unless you use an external buffer. I think beyond that, you need to go do some reading. I'm not saying that you don't know something. I think it's great to ask questions, but I think that's as much time as I can give it in this chat. Otherwise, I would just be repeating myself. And obrigado for being here. I love Lisbon. Hey, Seth B. Sorry about your tube tester doesn't work. Such is life. Hey, NJ Sonia. Any tubes that I recommend for tone and durability besides Mesas and a Lone Star? Well, Mesa does not make tubes. The tubes which are labeled Mesas are Softex. 12AX7 WXA, and just general Sovtek EL34s and 6L6s and 5881s. And all the gray and yellow and red and green labels on Mesa power tubes are kind of saying that these are going to bias in a certain range. So the yellow ones may draw 30 milliamps, and the gray ones may draw 37 milliamps. So if you want to match some tubes, you'd go all gray or all green or all red. There's no magic to it beyond that. It's just a rough bias sorting and rough matching. So if you want to get the authentic Mesa sound without paying for Mesa tubes, buy the ones that say Sovtek. But you can use any tube of the same type in a Lone Star. And as coldly biased as Mesas are, you can almost use any of them without ever worrying about what the actual bias is, as long as they're matched to each other. And so if you get a different brand from a vendor, just say, I want a matched pair of 6L6s or a matched quad of EL34s or whatever. And that'll give you the same thing as the green, gray, yellow, red, whatever. Hey, Frank, what do I think of the Jet City JCA20H? I think it can be made into a really nice sounding amp. It's really well built overall for the price. The issue with them is the power transformer is not the most reliable, and on some of them the power switch fails, and some of them the pilot light, the lamp, becomes loose and spins and can actually cause a short, which kills the power transformer. So they need to be made sure that they're tight before you use them. Open them up, make sure all that's working well, and they're really nice amps for the price. They're not going to replace a Soldano, but they also don't cost. They cost about what the sales tax on a Soldano is. So, hey, Riffman, I'm glad that works for you. I had the Classic 50. I liked the Classic 50 for the price, especially for $65. You totally won. My only caveat about the Classic 50 and why I didn't recommend it in the Amps Under 500 or Amps Under $1,000 video is that PV is a shadow of its former self, and their parts department is shut down. And the Classic 50 and the Classic 30 and the Delta 30 and all that use some very specific pots and jacks which are not available from anyone else. And so if you need service on that amp, you may not be able to get parts. So I didn't want to say, hey, go buy something for $450, and then 6 months from now, you won't be able to fix it. That's throwing your money away. But if you make an educated risk, if a Classic 50 can sound great. Hey, Matt Houston. He bought a 64 Handwire Deluxe Reverb that I hate, but for a good deal. How much ballpark should a complete upgrade and noise elimination cost? Thank you. About $250 to $350. I actually have one that's supposed to be coming in this week, and I'll be featuring it on the channel soonish. And you can hear the before and after and look at the before and after to decide if it's something you want to pursue. But one of the things I'll be doing is denoising it, which I should not have to do on a brand new $2,500 amp. Should I? Hey, Jordan Dreger. The Fender 2 series are cheap for a reason. I'm not a fan. I think started from 81 to about 94, Fender had some dark times with their amps. Hey, Ted Miller. As a whole, are glass envelope tubes more microphonic than metal counterparts? I cannot say, because most of the metal counterparts I've had or have been decades old, and the replacements are also decades old. So I don't know if they used to be much better. I don't. In my experience, I've not noticed any predictable difference, but perhaps conceptually there is. Let's see. Have I ever had an old Fender with DC on the board that I couldn't save? I've had Fender boards that I couldn't save because they had charred. And I had one this was several years ago. I've figured out better ways to do it. But at the time, isopropyl wasn't getting all the DC out, so I took the damn thing. I took all the capacitors off the board and took the whole thing out into the driveway and used brake cleaner fluid to clean it. And that did the trick, but, that's terrible stuff for us and for the environment, and I prefer not to use it. But usually, unless an amp is physically burned where there's carbon buildup, I can save it. And usually just with heat and isopropyl alcohol and careful removal of surface yuck, top and bottom of the board. Hey, Joe Bucci, or Buki, I guess it's Bucci. On a DSL-40C, can't you use the two 8-ohm jacks on the back with a 16-ohm and 8-ohm load? Would it be considered a safe mismatch? Well, if you're using the two 8-ohm jacks, I would have to look at the amp to see if they intend for that to be a 4-ohm load when both are used, or whether it's just two jacks on the 8-ohm tap. If it's two jacks on the 8-ohm tap, you're fine using a 16-ohm and 8-ohm load in that. Because if you have two 8-ohm loads at the same time, you've got a 4-ohm load. It's a 4-ohm to 8-ohm mismatch in terms of the load versus the secondary of the output transformer. If you have 16 ohms and 8 ohms, instead of having 4 ohms, you'd have like 6 ohms. So you'd have 6 ohms on an 8 ohm. So it's totally fine. As long as the DSL-40C isn't expecting, if you use both those jacks, for it actually to be a 4 ohm load. You'd still be fine, but it would be fine in a different direction. What you don't want to do is use a 16 ohm load with a 16 and an 8, because that would be 16 ohm secondary expectation, but only 6 ohms on the load. Hey, Dino Fawn, the AC15 heads are really good. They're the exact same as the combos. The issue is that they're not much lighter than the combos. If you've got a really bad back, there are other amps out there. You can get a Princeton, you can get various digital modeling things. I don't know what sounds you're trying to get, but yeah, the AC15 heads are not a lot lighter than the combos. Sorry. I wish Fox would change their cabinet design, because they are just ridiculously heavy for what they are and what they need to be. But at least what's inside the cabinet is good. Hey, Paul, I'm not arguing with you that it doesn't work. I want people to know that when you use acids on steel, the steel often turns black. So something to be aware of. I've not tested citric acid in washing soda, baking soda mixture. Hey, Frank Serafino, can you change them out without rebiasing? Yes. I don't know whether you're going to have good results, because sometimes you rebias and you went from 55% to 53%. Sometimes you rebias, you went from 55% to 65%. But sometimes you rebias and you went from 60% to 78%. And you didn't even, if you don't check the bias, you don't know. If you're looking to save money in long term, I would suggest, when you say if you have an amp that uses 2 power tubes, order 4 matched power tubes. Have the bias checked, so that 2 years, 3 years later, when you need to change out those 2 tubes, you've got 2 new ones exactly ready to go, and the amp's already set for them. Hey, Captain Grumpus, I have not physically been in the room with the Fender Panoverb, and I hope not to, because it is one of the ugliest things ever put on the market. From a design perspective, it looks like it's just hell with all that yellow and crappy look, and I'm pretty whelmed with the design. The people who are paid to tell you it sounds great say that it sounds great, and the people who are paid to tell you that it sounds great are pretty much capable of playing really well and making anything sound good enough in a video what with mics and compression and EQ and all kinds of stuff. But the design itself is whoop-de-doo, and visually it is a horror show. Speaking of which, yeah, same thing, Kevin Ortiz. Sorry. Thank you, Victor. Mahalo. Now, Victor, I really appreciate you doing that, but I want you to know you don't have to. I know that life in Hawaii is expensive, and I think you've said before that you're living on retirement. So, I don't mean to call you out, but while it's appreciated, is certainly not necessary. I may be able to buy an early 70s quad reverb, WrestleMania 7 says, has been transferred to a head cabinet. Any thoughts or concerns? Well, the only real concern is that say this remote control is the reverb tank, and this power adapter is the power transformer. In a Vibrolux reverb or a twin reverb, they're far apart. If you put them in a regular head, they become very close to each other, and the noise field coming out of the power transformer is picked up by the reverb tank, and you get a big buzz and hum. Now, if you look at the Showman reverbs and the Bandmaster reverb heads, you'll notice that they're very tall compared to other Fenders. So you have that enough of a space, not as much as with a combo, certainly. Where is that? But a lot, and you don't get this. So if you're going to rehouse a Fender reverb into a head, make sure you get a tall head, like the Bandmaster or taller. Hey, Robin Boyd, tube amp with mains and standby. Best practice for powering up, powering down. If the amp's got a tube rectifier, leave it in play. Don't use the standby. Keep the standby in play and just use the power switch. If it has got a solid state rectifier, then when you before you power it on, make sure the power and standby are both down, so it's power's off and it's in standby. Flip it the power to on. Wait about a minute and a half. Flip it out of standby, and then when it's time to turn off the amp, just power it off, and 10 minutes later, put standby to move the standby switch back to standby. That way, any voltage in the preamp filter nodes will also drain through the bleed resistors in the HT reservoir stuff. If you put the amp in, if you turn the amp to standby at the moment you power it off, those caps will maintain a charge, which won't really hurt the amp, but it's just best practice. Standby is only ever used properly for powering up an amp. It's not necessary at all for powering down the amp, unless you have one of those amps where when you power it off, it makes a big pop through the output, which is a sign of a problem in the amp, but sometimes you can put it in standby before you power it off and avoid that. Let's see. Hey, Sageist Owl Reviews. What is my opinion on certain amp makers, matchless, running the power tubes too hot? Is there any tonal benefit, and is it worth the need of changing the tubes more often? Thanks. There are people who say there's a tonal benefit. I've certainly rebiased many matchlesses, so the EL84s are biased at 14%, at 14 watts rather than 19 watts, so only at 120% rather than almost 200% of their rated dissipation. And I've ended up with a matchless which sounds fantastic, but doesn't run nearly as hot and doesn't cook itself, where the resistors don't bake, the black plastic panels on the rear don't crack and warp. Matchless, and among other companies, just runs their output tubes too hot. The same thing for the Fender Blues Junior. It's not just a matchless bad cat kind of thing. If you look at an old AC30, when they're operating properly and they have the correct voltage and the correct mains frequency, they're going to be biased between 100 and 120% dissipation. So you're looking for 12 to 14 watts power dissipation on those EL84s. I think what Matchless was chasing, and has promoted the idea of is that those 60s AC30s, when plugged into US mains in the 80s, were running way too hot because all the B plus came up. And some of those amps sounded real good until they blew up. And I think Matchless is baking in that, hey, this amp's is trying to kill itself sound, which if you like it, that's great. And if you can afford to replace output tubes an awful lot, and you don't mind the fact that every component in that part of the circuit is going to die prematurely, and that the black plastic panels will warp and crack because they get way too freaking hot, fine. You are intentionally damaging the amp to achieve a sound that you think is necessary. But I've just played so many AC30s that are properly serviced and maintained and running at the proper levels, and it is a glorious sound, and you're not lacking anything. I mean, you're still running them hotter than the data sheet suggests. So I guess it's a question of how much do you want to punish them, and whether you think you're doing it because you actually hear something or because you think it's cool. Not you, Sage of Styles reviews, but whether one thinks it's cool. Hey, Profile Productions, I'm glad you made it live. How does a 68 Bassman for a 1250 sound? It depends on how good a condition it is. I'm used to those being much less expensive, but then I'm old and set in my ways. It's probably a good deal for the market these days, but you have to remember that's a head by itself. For that money, you could get a 76 Super Reverb or Twin Reverb and get the cabin speakers as well. But a 68 Bassman's a good sounding thing. All right, Lee, after the chat, I'll look up what you're talking about, see if there's some brilliance to your suggestion, which eluded me. But I think simple is always better. So 2 standoffs, 2 screws, it's not a lot of weight. So I think, especially given how ugly the finish is on a galvanized steel electrical component, I think I don't think it would be good, but it might function. Glenn Beeler, what would be the best 5E3 kit? I don't know. I don't keep up with kits. I imagine the Mojo Tone would make you very happy, though. Hey, Red Wolf Tone. Wolf 1. Sorry, Red Wolf. Is Red Wolf 1. Hey, Red Wolf 1. What a good milliamp on a Silvertone 1472 6v6. What would cause a 6x4 to go on and off is not the tube going to check joints, worried about the power transformer. I don't have a 1472 here. I know that the bias in most Silvertones is kind of crazy. The entire power supply is pretty unreliable in those things. I would change every diode, every cap in the power supply, triple check every every solder joint, and especially if it has those green coupling caps, those are always bad. Replace them on site. A lot of the Silvertones need so much work to be made working right, and they're so poorly built. I think it's a money pit for most people because of freaking Jack White. Hey, Les Ghost. The rubber spacer that goes with the feet on my 64 Vibrolux is dried and crumbling. I bought some Mojo feet to harvest the rubber, but the Mojo feet are about 1 millimeter taller and don't fit. What to do? I just replaced the damn original feet with the new ones, because the old feet are the ones that just go with a single nail, the ones with the rubber pad. And then if you move the amp around for about 6 weeks, they're going to get all scuffed and matted up and match the old ones. But if you want to take the shine off of them, you can just take the new feet and hit it with some 3M sanding stuff. What is that stuff called? The Scotch-Brite stuff. And that'll take the shine right off them. That's what I would do. I'd put the originals in a bag, and if I ever sell the amp to a collector, I say, here are the originals. Thank you, Goody Guitars. Appreciate that. Hey, Kyle Driscoll. If an amp is crackling when it starts up, it goes away after 10 minutes, what could be the culprits? Could be a lot of things. It could be a bad solder joint. It's also likely it's one of the tubes. So the first thing to do is to pull the phase inverter. When the amp is cold, power amp on. Does it still do the crackle? Well, that's in the output section. It's not any of the preamp tubes. All right, well then, does it have a tube rectifier? All right, well, let it cool off completely. Change the tube rectifier tube. Try again. If it's not that, if you can, change the power tubes out for a different set. If it's not that, then you've got a iffy solder joint somewhere in the amp. But usually that kind of thing is a tube, because tubes physically expand and contract inside the glass as they heat up. And sometimes you'll have a tube that's not really well built, and you don't have it's not really working until it gets hot. And as the tubes heat over 10 minutes, all the connections get better. Hey, Taunli, I have come across Fender Pro Sonics. They're all right. That's not the best period of Fender, and the reverb circuit has got some really strange choices in there. Though they did publish some fixes, but it's still such a strange, noisy circuit. I wouldn't seek them out, but some people will love them. Yeah, Brad, they are bringing up the quality of the PCBs on the newer Fenders. I've not had the Jack White in, but the 68, not 68, but I guess it's marketed as 68. The custom Pro Reverb that they have now, or whatever, which is a single channel, not a Pro Reverb. But it also has a much higher quality board than the rest of the reissue series. It's double-sided, through-hole plated, as is, oddly, the VibroChamp. It's a well-built little amp for the price, aside from the DSP, which is going to fail. But maybe they'll go back and redo the boards on their regular reissues, but you and I both know that's unlikely. But they are making better boards now in the newer amps. I can't get over the cosmetics of that Panovision thing. Hey, Profile Productions. I don't think anything about the Synergy 20 IR amp that was at NAMM, because I was not at NAMM, and I've not looked at any of the stuff on YouTube from NAMM, because all the channels simultaneously were NAMM, and I've become jaded from having actually been to NAMM, and this next new thing is going to change the world. And 3-4 years ago, it was Fender Acoustic Sonic, so everyone was talking about. No one plays those things today. I'm jaded, but I know some of the guys involved in Synergy, and I'm sure it's a good product. But I'm not in the market for an amplifier, so I've not kept up with what's coming out. But the Synergy guys, Bruce and Dave, etc., make good stuff. I'm sure it's fine, or even better than fine. Hey, Dustin Corbin. He's got an old Trainer YGL3 that works for about 5 minutes, but soon develops a feedback screech. It gets louder over time. Tubes were improperly indexed when I got it. Well, I think you could have a very microphonic tube. That's the first thing to rule out. Second of all, you could have something in the amp causing oscillation. It could be anything from a iffy ground joint, solder joint, to a component that's drifted, to something which is just inherently microphonic inside the amp. But I would say do not use it swap tubes around to see if it goes away. Other than that, you take it to a tech. It can be all kinds of things causing oscillation. There's oscillation that we hear, and there's oscillation that we cannot hear. The scope is there for when I know that this amp is acting up, but I can't hear any direct cause. The scope will say, it's because it's got this really high frequency signal stealing all the power. But sometimes amps are nice, and they say, no, I'm going to have a problem, but I'm going to have a problem where you can hear it. So it sounds like yours is being very polite. Hey, Guy or Guy, I have had Victory amps. I've had the Duchess and another model which looked just like the Duchess but had a different model name. and they were really well built for what they were. But long-term service is going to be expensive on them, and I'm not a big fan of the lunchbox style amps, if that's one of the ones you're looking at, because every time you've got to change tubes, you got to remove all these little bitty screws and take the shell off, and then change the tubes, and then you got to put all back together, all these little bitty screws, and each one of those screws can get mangled. It's just so much. So many of those lunchbox style amps 5-10 years later are missing screws, are rattly, or are just noisy. I think the little sister would be the safer bet, but the victories when they are working, and the ones I had minor failures, are really good sounding amps with a lot of features that players want. So I can't make the choice for you, but I would say that the Freeman is the better probability of still being a functional amp 20 years from now. Oh, that's right. Sorry. Someone asked me if I was watching the Super Bowl. I only found out yesterday that the Super Bowl was happening this week. I will not be. Basically, I found out the Super Bowl was happening Sunday, and I thought, well, I'm not going out to eat anywhere tomorrow, so I'll just stay home. So because it just ruins any restaurant that has a television. I don't care about the sports balls. I like individual sports. I don't like team sports. It's are they running this way? Are they running that way? The only exception is baseball, because baseball, it comes down to the pitcher versus the batter. So it becomes individual at that point, and you can actually see skill, not just I get the strategy thing with football and all that, but I'm not a fan. And I really don't understand. People are like, "Yeah, we won." No, no, you sat your butt on the couch. Those guys who get paid millions, they won. And it's also weird to me where I'm like, "Hey, the Detroit people the Detroit Lions are winning, or the Philadelphia people." Those teams are all mercenaries. And half the people, it's not like everyone on the Detroit team is from Detroit, or everyone on the Philly team is from Philly. That would be cool, but those days are long past. It's just such a mercenary, professional, overhyped Bud Light sponsored thing. I don't care. Hey, Rob Hunter. He's got an 84 50-watt JC100. Has not been modded. Love to have an effects loop, but I definitely would not want to drill in a chassis. Any good options? Yeah, don't do anything. If you really, really want to have the ability to use effects like an effects loop, look at the Fryette Power Station 100, because you could take the speaker level out of your JMP. JCM. Jacob's got a JMP beneath you, the JCM, and run effects into a separate cab, and not modify your Marshall in any way, or lose the core sound of your Marshall in any way. And if you've got an 84 50-watt, that's a great amp. Now, granted, it would be better if it was 82, because 83 is when the changes started, but the 84 is still a very good amp. And I don't think that you would really benefit from adding an effects loop to it so much as you would investing in the Fryette, because then you could use that Fryette with any of your other amps. It wouldn't just be like, hey, I put an effects loop into this one amp. No, I have now an effects loop system that I can use with any of my amps. All right, we're coming up to the first hour. I think we're going to take a 7-minute intermission. And then we'll come to Jacob K. Guitar's question about his JMP. But my teeth are floating, so I'll see you guys in about 7 minutes. Sorry I'm late. I had to blow my nose. I figured I'd do that off camera. Weather keeps changing. It was like in the 40s yesterday, in the mid 70s today. It'll probably be like 20 tomorrow. And my sinuses just do the thing. Let's back to it. Sorry about that. Jacob K. Guitar. What are the signs of a bad underspec output transformer? My JMP 87 has a 480 B plus power transformer, has a non-original output transformer. And after trying everything else, I think the output transformer isn't good. Farts out lows, all volumes, ring mods. Those sound like they might be. Or it could be a filtering issue. Could be a bad ground somewhere in the amp. It could be that the physical hardware on the transformer itself is loose. There are bolts which bolt the whole thing together, and they press those laminations together. So when I have an amp on the bench, and I suspect it's got a bad output transformer, I try everything else first, and then I've got spare generic transformers here. So I will disconnect the transformer from inside the amp and temp in a new output transformer, mounted outside the amp just with long leads. But that's a last ditch thing. I don't like to call a client and say you need a new output transformer. But I especially don't like to call a client and say you need a new output transformer and then find out that no, it was just a ground connection somewhere else was bad, and I just bought a $200 transformer that I've got to pay the client back, and then I've got another one. Though the flip side of that was that's how I have some spare transformers sitting around for testing. But you can also get in there and scope up to the grids, and then scope the plates and see if what the signal going to the transformer really is. But beyond holding your hand through that, I can't do any more from here. So be cautious, but they do sometimes go bad. Hey, Nicholas Rivera, he asks, negative feedback. Is it safe to play with an amp with it disconnected or with a 1 meg pot? Yeah, totally safe. There's almost no voltage and there's very little current present in a negative feedback circuit. Just make sure it doesn't, if you disconnected it, the wire is not just flopping around that could touch ground or touch power, then you have a bad experience. But yeah, it's safe to disconnect it or put a pot in there. If you have too much negative feedback, you can have a problem. So if you replace, say, in a Marshall, a 22K resistor with a 1 meg pot, that means at some point of that pot's range, it's going to go below 22K, and you can have too much negative feedback. You can introduce oscillation. So if you really want to play around with this, a lot of times you're going to want to have a minimum resistor where no matter what you do with the pot, it can't go below a certain amount of resistance. So if you have a Marshall with a 100K negative feedback resistor, you might want to have a 68K to 100K minimum. Sometimes it's safe to go between, say, 47K and 100K in a Marshall. You also have to look at the schematic for that era. Sometimes they'll, or look at if the amp was built correctly. Sometimes they'll say, I'm going to use a 47K off the 8 ohm tap, but it's actually connected to the 16 ohm tap, so you've never had the full negative feedback they designed. There are a lot of variables, but just don't give it. It's fine to have no negative feedback, but you don't want to have too little. It's fine to have no negative feedback, but you don't ever want to have too much because then you get weird oscillations, and you'll hear it when it happens. It's not pleasant. Hey, Gary Thorstensen. I have had one Benson come in, and it was really immaculately built, and I was pretty impressed with it. It was a bit... The cabinet work was a bit over the top, I thought. I thought it was trying to be like a Rolls-Royce approach. There's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know. It'd be an amp that I'd be afraid to throw in the back of a car and gig with, but just because I wouldn't want to put any surface scratches on it, but internally it was really well built. Hey, John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate that. For those of you who don't know, you need to check out John's channel. He's got a great channel going there. Phenomenal player. Speaking of which, there's Jeff McErlane, also phenomenal. Check out Jeff's channel. Check out John's channel. You probably never come back to mine after that, sadly. I love the ability to peek into a different musician's world, especially when they share so much with us. Both are great players, and neither one have the gunslinger mentality. And that's cool when the talent is there, but the ego seemingly is not. But it may have something to do with Jeff's really cool hats. Hey, Jacob. Okay. Marshall grounds for the filter caps. You can change out a filter cap and still, have a perfectly fine cap and still have bad filtering. I've shown in a lot of my videos. In a Marshall, you've got a brass screw going through a steel chassis, which then has a black oxide washer and a brass nut holding, making the grounds with a ground lug, which is tinned, and then the whole thing is covered in paint. And it is very, very common for those things to come slightly loose or to corrode because you have dissimilar metals that all cause chemical reactions with each other. So the first thing I do when I get a Marshall like that in is I disconnect. I do this to all the filter cap mounting hardware, but specifically the ones that are also used for grounds. I will take it all apart. I'll put it all in some acetone, get the paint off, get any tarnish off. If I need to do any further cleaning, I will. I want clean brass. I want clean steel. I don't want black oxides, and I don't want those tiny little ground lugs that Marshall used because the wires don't physically fit through them. And then I will put in a new tinned ground lug, which has holes that the wires can actually physically go into. And I will reassemble the whole thing tightly, make all my solder joints, make sure everything's working well, and then I'll often go, and because I still have dissimilar metals there, I'll put some clear nail polish on that so that oxygen isn't reaching where the zinc-plated brass and the steel and the brass are all making contact with each other. That really slows that interaction. And because the difference between having 3 ohms and 0 ohms for grounds cumulatively is a lot. So it's a very it's labor intensive, but it's cheap. So I would recommend looking into that before you go crazy. And even if you do that, you still have the issue that then you know that your grounds are good. And again, the meter testing connectivity with a meter, can't think of continuosity. Just using it so the meter beeps is not enough. A meter will beep on a bad ground. You've got to actually measure the actual ohms. Let's see here. Well, that's a shame, T777, because that's what it means to be a man. Hey, Bottom Kitchen. I've not had any problem with the EL84 EHs not fitting in Vox reissues. I have had problems with various Russian tubes barely fitting in any a preamp socket that's got a bayonet base. With where has a little tube the tube goes into, and then you put the shield over it, because the diameter of those metal bases, the bayonet bases, is expecting a traditional size diameter preamp tube, and a lot of the Russian ones, the glass is actually larger than that, and so it's a tight fit, though it will work. Just a little bit harder to get in and out. But I've not run into that with any of the EL84s. So, and I've certainly bought an awful lot of EL84s and put them in an awful lot of Voxes. So I tend not to use electroharmonics on the EL84s. I tend to prefer Tube Amp Doctor and Tung Sol and JJ, but I'll have to look into that. The thing is, most of the EL84 sockets aren't using bayonet bases. They're using, it's just a bare ceramic base, and then you've got a spring retainer for it. So I don't see how that would be happening. Hey, Edved796, appreciate that. Forgive my ignorance, but can a 68 basement be modded to sound more like a black panel twin reverb? Thanks for your time. Well, it's not that far off already, as long as you don't turn it up above about 3, because above 3, it's going to get dirty. The issue with the 68 basement, same issue with the 65 or 66 basement, all the what's the one, AB 165s, is that they have a really high self-noise floor, both due to the design and to how parts age. And if you look at my videos, I'm a big proponent of keeping the AB 165 preamp section with one mod shown in those videos, but going to the AA864 output section, which has actual negative feedback. It doesn't have the local negative feedback through the plates. It's a much quieter power section, at which point, aside from the lack of reverb and the lack of tremolo, and the fact that a twin reverb vibrato channel has got additional gain stage with a little bit of high treble preemphasis, it'll sound an awful lot like the normal channel in a twin or the normal channel in a super reverb. It's a beautiful, clean sound. But in stock form, that beautiful clean sound is riding over a background of See, Victor, I told you, Germinos make good amps. Germino, Greg, makes great amps. Yeah, I really like Germinos. Hey, Dino Fund, I appreciate the super chat, but as you'll have realized, I answered your question 30, 40 minutes ago before the super chat. So I want everyone to know I answer them in the question that they come in. I know a lot of other channels, when they do a live stream, they prioritize super chats. So if someone has a super chat, it goes right to the top. I don't have someone here running admin and tell me that. I don't see a super chat until I come to it. And if I come to your question ahead of time, I'll answer it. The super chats are appreciated, but they are not necessary for me to answer the question. I will answer every question asked that I can within the 3 hours we do this. Now, the only difference is towards the end of this chat, and I'm running out of time. If you've asked a super chat, I absolutely will answer it then, but it doesn't give a priority, and you don't have to do the super chat to get your question answered. You do have to do an even bigger super chat to get the correct answer. So far, no one has paid me enough to get the correct answer. Hey, Brendan Gottner. I believe it's the Tweaker 40 is the worst, and I think the Rebel series had some issues. The Tweaker 15 is not nearly as problematic as I understand. Hey, Greg, the bathroom renovation, I have not done anything for a month, and I'm going to be doing some more tomorrow. I was physically getting really worn down, and I had bills that I needed to pay, and I just needed to get a whole bunch of amps done so I could afford to do more stuff. Right now, the next thing I need to do is I bought a squared around adapter and a square HVAC, what do you call it? Not receptacle, the wall vent where the hot and cold air comes out, that's supposed to fit in the wall. So if I can get it coming out of the wall about 8 inches above the floor rather than coming up through the floor, I think that'd be much nicer to have in a bathroom so nothing can go down into the vents, water or whatever. But I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to be able to fit it in the space given where the sills are. So I'm going to be looking at that tomorrow. My backup plan is to do a register. My backup plan is to do a regular floor-mounted register, but I'm going to try to see if I can get a wall-mounted register in there while keeping the structural strength. So we shall see. But I was so physically worn out from getting all the floor joists in and getting everything jacked up and leveled. My left ankle's got issues, and I just couldn't walk for about a week. The Classic 20, Chris, it's a cathode bias Class AB. It's vaguely similar to an AC15, but not really. It's got some Voxy things. It's got a whole bunch of Fendery things. It's a nice little amp for what it was at the time, but yeah, it is definitely not a high headroom versatile thing. It's a cool little amp to have, though. I think it's better built, certainly, than the I guess market-wise comparable Fender Pro Junior. Hey, Surge 98, tubes don't go bad just from sitting around unless they're just being stored in absurd environments, like something that could just not just tarnish but could rust any pins exposed to the air. I mean, yeah, like Ted says, they do slowly lose vacuum, but when they're not being heated and cooled repeatedly, because when you use them in an amp, they're cycling very, very hot to cool to very, very hot. So, in an amp, they're going to last less time than they are just sitting on a shelf. But a lot of the new old stock stuff is fine. I just don't think that it's inherently worth more because it's old. Some things, yes, like a 5Y3 or a GZ34, the old stuff is much better built than anything on the market today. But as far as a preamp tube goes, a power tube, I think guitarists love to spend a lot of money on things so they don't have to spend a lot of hours on practice. No one sells a great, no one ever got rich selling metronomes. But if you look at John Cordy or Jeff McElwain, I imagine that they spend a lot more time playing than the rest of us do, and they analyze their playing, and they listen, and they record themselves, and they spend time with the metronome, and all that boring stuff that won't make you sound like Eric Clapton or this one easy trick to blah, blah, blah. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Again, the super stickers, I don't see what they're supposed to look like until I watch the replay and see what they looked like at the time that you posted them. Hey, Frank. Let's see. Can I recommend a high-quality speaker cable for head-to-cab connection, and what gauge thickness is best for tone and performance? 6 to 10-foot cable. Thanks. It's going to depend to an extent on what amp it is. If it's an SVT, you're going to want to have 16 or 14 gauge wire and pretty heavy-duty plugs. Of course, when you get into that power in modern amps, you'd be wanting to look at using power cons and stuff, speaker cons. But for guitar amps, the wattage and the current is so much less that you don't need to use 14 or 16 gauge cable, and there'd be no real benefit to it because, say, you go from a Marshall head to a Marshall cabinet and you use 12 gauge, really thick, really expensive cable to go 6 feet from the head to the cab. Well, inside the cab, they got 20 gauge wire. So that's your bottleneck. You're not going to magically pass more signal through 20 gauge wire because you use 12 gauge up to it at these very short lengths that we're talking about. So in general, 18 gauge cable is absolutely fine for external speaker cables. Inside the amp, 20 and even 22 can be fine. Inside a combo or inside a cab, though, I would use 20 at the minimum. But outside, because it's a physical cable that gets coiled up after a gig, it could get stepped on, could get tugged on. You want something kind of rugged, so I'd go 18 gauge. I use Mogami Soundrunner an awful lot, and I don't have any handy. It's all over there, but there's a speaker cable that Tube Depot sells lengths of that I like, and it's 18 gauge, and it's all joined kind of like lamp wire. And it's real easy. And you stick it into an Amphenol or Neutrik or Switchcraft plug. with good solder connections, and you got a good cable. Or you can go to Guitar Center and buy the same thing pre-made for 4 times the price. Hey, Chris. Yeah, the transformers in the Weber kits are really bad. But the trouble is, the quality of a lot of stuff in the Weber kit is pretty bad. So I don't know whether it'd be good a good use of your money to upgrade the transformers in that Weber kit, or whether to say, well, that's a lot of work. Maybe I just say, all right, I built a Weber kit and it works, but I think I want it to the next level up and go to Mojo Tone, where they're going to have good transformers and good components across the board. The Weber chassis are just bad. The switches are bad. They cheap out on the wrong things, and I'm not sure if there's any right things to cheap out on. So and I'm not saying you've got to spend an arm and a leg, but you definitely get what you pay for. So if you want to, yeah, you'd notice an increase. It may or may not sound any better, but it'll last a lot longer. But I also would be concerned about putting a high-quality transformer into a Weber kit build because those chassis are so flimsy. I'm not sure they could bear the weight of a good transformer. And a good transformer has a more substantial weight to it. So I guess I'm not trying to shit on your amp, and I'm glad you like the sound. But I think if you like the sound, that's fine. If you want something better, get something better, and the Mojo Tone would be one of the good options. Hey, Benjamin Lowe would like to get into a hand-wired Blackface Princeton with some mods, build my own from scratch, or make modifications to a pre-made. I don't know. I don't know what your experience level is, Benjamin. I mean, if you're really a good builder, you would get excellent results with you doing it either way. I would say that converting the production Princeton to hand-wired would take more time than just building a kit from scratch. So unless you just want to make modifications to a PCB and leave the PCB. But if you really want it hardwired, hand-wired stuff, yeah, it'd probably be best to do a kit because you wouldn't have to reinvent so many wheels and have weird original holes that you've got to plug up and stuff, like where they run the reverb connections and stuff is odd compared to the originals. I'm trying to remember if they do that on the Princeton. They do that on the Deluxe and others on the 65 series, where it just comes out of the bottom of the chassis. What changes or considerations do I make when voicing, modding, building amps for harmonica players? Well, I don't do it an awful lot of it. There aren't that many harmonica players who care enough about their amps to get them fixed. In general, they're looking for a roll-off of highs, and they tend to like little or no or reduced negative feedback. But if you look at like the little Walter harmonic amp that everyone loves, it is terribly built. Amateur hour, should not be sold as a commercial product. But all they're doing is they're taking like a standard Twinder circuit and adding a 10 nanofarad cap to ground at one point. It just dumps everything over about 700 something hertz. It's not like it's up to 700 hertz and then it just stops. It rolls down, but and people just go ape shit for that thing. Also, people like real band limited speakers in conjunction with all that. So that's if you want to sound like Elwood Blues. I prefer the Stevie Wonder harmonica sound, which is a Stevie Wonder with a harmonica in front of a U87 or C12. But if you want to really sound like Little Walter, the trouble is those amps are being tortured to sound like a bad recording of Little Walter done at Chess Studios in 1948 or 54 or whatever. Little Walter didn't sound like that in the room. You take Little Walter and put him in front of that C12 today, you get a different sound than you did in front of an old Beat to Hell Altec ribbon mic, running it into an old Beat to Hell 7 IPS, 7.5 IPS tape machine that probably hadn't been aligned right, and an old garage that had linoleum tiles and weird surfaces, and it's cool if you're chasing that vibe, but to me, baking that into the app is a bit odd. I am not too familiar, Joseph, between the difference between the 30 and 35 on the Badgers, but I am glad to know that you do, in fact, need a stinking Badger. They're really nice amps. I think they're really sleepers on the market. I don't understand why, but I think you'll be very happy with either one. Oh, circuit wise, they're fine, Chris. I mean, it's just everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's got different things on different channels with different speakers." It's really it's nothing innovative. It's just that most companies don't bring things like that to market because it's a very small group of people who will want that. In this case, because Jack White has put his name on it, it has led people to realize that, hey, that is one of the options that's out there. Magnetone's looking at that saying, well, we've been doing that and better for decades. But I think most people after Magnetone are wanting to sound like Billy Gibbons, and most of the really great Magnetones aren't doing that kind of thing. And it's if it wasn't for the Jack White Association and Fender brought this to market, it would be who asked for this? Who's this amp for? Yes, it's nice that it can do all these things, but how often are you going to have stereo tremolo with a 10-inch and 12-inch speaker? It's a cool thing that it does, and honestly, most players, if it wasn't chasing the Jack White thing, they'd say, "Well, that's great, but I can do that with my Strymon Flint or whatever. It's run in stereo." Marketing is an impressive thing. Let's see. I'm scrolling down through people talking to each other. Here's an interesting question. Kyle Ray says, over time, have I ever lost interest in listening to music or seeking out new music? If so, what things would get me interested again? This is a long-standing debate between Nikki, my wife, and myself, in that I intentionally, every couple of months, will check out what's happening on like the Spotify top 10, or I'll hear some new music, and I'm pretty much always underwhelmed with it, and I find it very predictable and very uninnovative, and for short attention spans. And Nikki accuses me of being an old man shouting at clouds, and I really do think that I'm taking the long view that no, right now we're at a bad point. The same way the pop music was between, say, 60 and 63, why the Beatles were such a big deal. It's because it had gotten so predictable and bubblegum and, A&R guys and at that time were just doing really safe white people music. And pop went really downhill for a long time, from after, people say, the day the music died. That's 59 and Elvis joins the army. There was a bad period of pop music until the Beatles came out and the British invasion came in and Motown started to catch on. There was a real bad period, like 61, pop music was so bad. And I think we're just in another one of those cycles. We're in one of those cycles for different reasons because of the Spotify algorithm and favoring short songs and there's no record companies anymore. So if you're going to spend the money to do a big production, you're going to make sure you're making some money on it. So everything sounds the same. At the same time, I think that Taylor Swift writes really good songs and has interesting arrangements. I think that there's some Latino beats that are crossing over into other forms of music that can be interesting, though, again, the same two keep happening again and again. I heard the trouble is, what's the best way to put this? I know how all those rabbits got in those hats in the first place, and I'm not impressed when they take them out. And I think that I last was connected to current music in, I think, about 2011, because the stuff Beyonce and Gaga were doing then was very interesting. Like you listen, or even like Britney Spears' "Toxic" with the psycho kind of string section thing was really cool. The Single Ladies was amazing harmonies and dissonances. I'm really that stuff. I like that Ear Candy, and I'll listen to that, and I'll listen to Holst the Planets, and I'll listen to Buck Owens, and I'll listen to the Beatles, and I'll listen to Miles Davis. I'm not just into one kind of music, but I think we're just in a period where everything is samey, and it's hard for me to find the time to seek out new music because I still am discovering older music. That said, I heard some Fiona Apple yesterday. Nikki was playing that I never heard before, and really experimental, innovative, off-the-cuff stuff. And I know that she's not a new artist, but it was new music that I hadn't heard before. I'm waiting for the next Beatles. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be four white guys from Britain or they're going to sound anything like the Beatles. But I want someone to come out and just say, yeah, that's how everyone does music, or we can do this, and that to be the new thing. And that will happen, but it's a bit overdue. Sorry to go on and on, but I really don't think that I'm being an old man who just hates all pop music today. I think I'm just recognizing that pop music is in a stagnant period, and rap is in a stagnant period, and country is just dire, modern pop country. But this stuff that's being called Americana can be great. So, Hey, Bambule, I have no idea where you get EL80 double pentoed. Sorry, I would contact all the tube vendors and see if they have a line on it. Let's see. Some say it's whether a different tube sounds different in an amp depends on the circuit. Can I tell from the circuit how much it will be affected by tube rolling? To a small extent, like Seth said right above, though I just scrolled wrong. So if you have a EL84 with high plate voltage, a 7189 or an old Muller EL84 will last a lot better and will be performing more happily, will sound better than a current production EL84. Same thing goes for maybe it's a Bogner Shiva that's got like 700 volts or 500 something volts on the plate. There are EL34s that can handle that better than others. So at the extremes, you're going to hear a difference. In a deluxe reverb, I don't know that you're going to hear a difference between an old RCA and an old Mullard and a current production Electro-Harmonic 7025. And I say that because I have had, here's a 65 Super Reverb on the bench right here. And I have done that test. Like, okay, here's this RCA from 1965, and here's a current production 12AX7, 7025, and I have swapped them out. And in general, there's either no difference or the old tube was noisy and microphonic and the new tube isn't. There have been times when old RCAs sound magical. I think that is increasingly more rare or decreasingly common for the old ones to truly sound better. And there have been Marshalls where changing tubes has had dramatic differences. But I think that's primarily due to two things. Number one, 12AX7s are all nominally rated for the gain factor of 100, but this 12AX7 may be actually having a gain factor of 80, and this one may actually have a gain factor of 115. And so the 115 is going to sound more interesting. Second of all, Marshall's got a very, like a Vox, has got a high voltage on the cathode of the cathode follower stage, and some tubes just collapse in that position. Other tubes are like, okay, let's do this thing. So. No, I've never been interested in an apprentice or helper. I'd spend all my time triple checking their work. I would never get anything done. It would be counterproductive. Hey, Bottom Kitchen. With the caveat that nothing made today sounds anywhere as good as the old CTS Alnico 10s. Those had a 1.5-inch voice coil, and I don't think there's a 10 on the market today with a 1.5-inch voice coil. Nothing's going to sound the same as having good condition CTS Alnicos, but there are a lot of 10-inch speakers that do sound great, and certainly more appropriate than greenbacks. If you can't find old CTS, I would. I'm not a huge fan of any of the 10-inch Alnicos for that amp. Though you might be happy with two of the Celestion Golds. I would think that you'd be thrilled, based on my experience, with the G10Cs or ET10. And if you listen to the actually, it's not up yet. I'm about to have some videos up on the channel. I've got one up where you can hear it with a 65 Princeton with a G10C, and you're about to hear another video coming up which has the 69 Princeton into the ET10. Those are fantastic in a Vibrolux, absolutely fantastic. But it makes it sound like a small twin. It's not going to give you the same Alnico softness. But beware, those 10-inch Alnicos, in a 1x10, they're terrible. 2x10, they're getting there, really nice. 4x10 in a Bassman or a Super Reverb, phenomenal. They need the space to build up the low end. Hey, BB Maid, I'll check the email. Sorry, I haven't checked in about 3 days. I just get so caught up in other things, and I have a constant stream of spam coming in and people wanting me to sell you guys video games and T-shirts and meal plans and stuff. Checking my inbox gets more and more depressing each day. Disadvantage besides cost? Not really. It makes it the load in a lot easier once you get to certain wattages. But if you can have a great sounding rig that's a separate preamp power amp, you have a great sounding rig that's all in one. It's just that most people today have moved away from the whole rack thing. And I don't think I've ever heard a rack setup that sounds quite as good as a great all-in-one amp, and I think it's just because the power supply, what happens to the power tubes affects what happens to the preamp tubes. But just because it's not as great does not mean that it can't be really, really good. So, and it's a different kind of sound and feel too. Hey, Thanasis Anagnostasis. I'm probably ruining that, sorry. He's new to Valve Amps and recently bought a 10-year-old Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue. Great choice. He's its third owner, as far as he knows. How often shall such amps be serviced? Thank you. Well, in general, there are 3 things to be aware of in your Deluxe Reverb reissue. Number 1, all the hardware can become loose over time. And I've got a video in my Fender playlist the app. I think it's Fender Reissues playlist on my channel, showing what owners can do to check that kind of thing. Make sure all the nuts are tight on the jacks and on the pots and everything. That's a big deal. Number two, filter caps in that amp tend to last about 3 to 10 years in stock form. So I often change out the filter caps in the Deluxe Reverb Reissues. It's not expensive or difficult to do. And it takes it from about a 3 to 10-year window to 20 years. Every 20 years it needs to be checked. And third of all, pardon me, the Deluxe Reverb Reissue, as with some of the other 65 and 68 reissue series, has two main things on the main board which get very hot and can damage the board. Number one, the green wires going to some quick connects on the board for the heater supply. And in my videos, I've shown removing those from the main board and reinstalling them to the octal sockets. You also have to do some stuff to add the heater balance resistors there, but I've shown that. And then the screen grid resistors can get very hot and burn the board, so I also move those to the output tube sockets. So those would be two areas of your amp to inspect visibly to see if there's any discoloration around the screen grid resistors or discoloration around where those two green wires come into the main board, and it'll look like the board is toasted from heat. So those are pretty easy things to do. It's a really nice amp. The stock speaker is usually terrible. It's either in a 10-year-old amp, it might be one of the newer Jensens, which is the C12K, which is not great. It might be one of the older custom-made for Fender generic Eminences, which are also not great. But the amplifier itself is capable of sounding fantastic. And especially if you can get them used, I highly recommend them. But they do have their drawbacks, and I've tried to show owners on my videos the things to do, either have done or do yourself, to make them as reliable as they could have been. Why is Fender still using axial filter caps, Seth asked. Well, they're not, by and large, in the new amps like I was talking about earlier, the Vibrochamp and the Jack White thing, and their new version of what they're calling a Pro Reverb. They're using radial caps, which is great. They're still using the axials in the older 65 and 68 reissue series because that's how they were designed, and they've not changed the board layout. And they also committed to having a doghouse. So there's some tricks to that. And they are using them in the 64 Custom Princeton and Deluxe Reverb because people who are looking to buy a hand-wired Fender expect to see big blue axial caps. It's total nonsense. Hey, Mind Files. I'm not a big fan of the old Studio series. In terms of the new stuff, I don't like it at all. I was thinking like the Studio 12 or whatever they had back in the 90s. The new Studio stuff, save your money, and save your wallet, and look into Friedman's. A used Friedman or even a new Friedman's is cost effective compared to a lot of the new Marshall prices in the U.S. Yeah, Marshall has not made a really great amp since about 1982, and not made a very good amp since the early 90s, in my opinion. So. T777 says, what's the difference between an amp inbox and overdrive distortion pedal? Well, an awful lot. I'm trying to figure out how much time to spend on this. In an amplifier, you have I could go into a really long technical discussion of this, but they sound very different. They feel very different. You have different aspects of control over it. And the nice thing is you can often have both, and you can choose which one's appropriate to the cause. But if you listen to like Gilmore's Comfortably Numb solo, that is a compressor and an EQ and a big muff pedal into a very clean Fender or Hiwatt amp. And it has a cool sound. It has its own sound. But if you listen to, say, Live at the Fillmore East, you can't get that out of an overdrive pedal. That's the amp singing. The amp is singing. Listen to the tone on Rush's Working Man, or listen to Since I've Been Loving You live at the Royal Albert Hall. Those were amps. Same time, listen to that cool clip of Page doing Dazed and Confused on that Swedish TV show. That was a fuzzbender, and it's a different sound. So it's not one's better than the other. They're cool, different sounds. Shadowboxer's got a 1980 Music Man 21275, hasn't been turned on for 10 years. Should I use a dim bulb on first startup? No, you should bring that up slowly with a dim bulb and a Variac, because even with the light bulb limiter, you can still have issues, and I'd be very careful. I would physically inspect the capacitors in that amp first, because it is very likely that you will see a problem that you don't even need to test. That's going cauliflower there. That's got a pimple on it, whatever. So I would do a thorough visual inspection before even thinking of plugging it into the wall. And then I would use a current limiter, a light bulb limiter, and a Variac, because I'd rather have see the short happening at 40 volts than at 100 volts or 120 volts. Let's see. Thanks, Les Ghost. I like you too. Let's see. Oh, I don't. Most of the restaurants I go to don't have TVs either. It's just a thing, you know. Some of the places I like to go do have TVs, you know, because people do like the sports ball and stuff. It's just on Super Bowl Sunday, the volume gets turned up, and that's what everything is there, and everyone in the world goes there. So it's a shame. There's a place here called Bayou Bar and Grill that makes a fantastic debris. I love a good debris, but not this Sunday. Let's see. People talking to each other while I was doing the first break. We're coming up on the second break. Let's see. Hey, Milo, that's too deep for me to get into. What mods would I make if I was building one from scratch? Everything and nothing. AC15, depends on if you're going to make a 15-watt version of the AC30, like Vox has for the last several decades, or whether you're going to make an actual 1962-ish AC15. But I can't tell you all the things I would change on here. It's either a very long list that we talk about for 40 minutes, or we just skip the next one. I'm sorry, I can't answer every question fully just because of time. Hey, guitar man, dreaded Black Star HT40 cuts after it gets hot, about 15 minutes. Turn off or back on. Can work for an hour. Cut off. Tubes stay lit. Just zero output. Well, it's going to depend on an extent on which version it is. The earlier ones, they've got a lot of surface mount stuff surrounded by through-hole radial caps. So it's like, say even if you knew that, I need to change that op amp and that diode right there, you can't physically get to them unless you remove all the big radial caps surrounding them. It's like reaching down from the sky to pick up a taxi on the street of Manhattan. Well, you can't, because you can't get your hand around the skyscrapers. On later ones, they have more space and they're easier to work on. I would see if you can find the schematic for the damn model and trace voltages, because it's probably going to be one of the solid-state components. They use solid-state. I think they're using IRFs in place of a phase inverter, and then they have a whole bunch of op-amp stuff. But if this is your amp, you can spend as much time on it as you want. If you're fixing it for someone else, you know, given the lack of support, you can contact Blackstar, see if they'll just sell you a board to swap out. It's faster to swap out a board than fix them. And they were never designed to be fixed. They were designed to board swap under warranty, or when they're out of warranty, then they convince the buyer that, hey, yeah, I'm sorry your Blackstar version 1 failed, but we got a version 2 now, and it's awesome. Come give us your money again. And people do. Hey, Des Vegas, thank you very much. It's been a while. Got a question on file. Is FX loop in the DSL-100H before or after the phase inverter? It has to be before. Would using a passive attenuator with clean channel crank drive it? Thank you very much. I'm not sure what you're saying. Would using a passive attenuator with clean volume crank to drive it? The FX loop is before the phase inverter. It has to be before the phase inverter. Now, in terms of I just with channel volume cranked, it's not clean. Sorry, it's hard for me to read it. I'm not sure what you're asking for. I'd love to answer this fully, Des, especially since you bribed me. But I'm not saying why you want to attenuate it to drive it. What is it? Sorry, I might be being dense here. I don't mean to be. Oh, rich pedals. I'm not. I'd have to sit down and do the math. That's. I'm not a transformer guy in terms of designing transformers and really understanding all that stuff. I am the kind of guy who has friends who are transformer guys, and I call them and say, "Hey, dumbass here, what blah blah blah," and they'll tell me the answer, and I take that to the bank. And I know how to install them, and I know how to diagnose them, and I understand. Compared to most people, I know transformers very well, but in terms of taking specs and predicting performance like that in a theoretical sense, I'm not going to give you a yes no on that because I don't know. Thanks, Jacob. I hope it helps. I hate output transformer issues. Hey, Narbonne. No, solid state amp usually lasts a lot longer than a tube amp because you're not using, the heat is not there, and the voltage is typically not there. It doesn't take as much voltage to drive an output output resistor as it does output transformer. Now, this is all theoretical, but in general, a solid state amp runs cooler, runs at lower voltages, and will last probably decades longer than a tube amp in terms of the component life if they're both taken care of. You know, if the solid state amp is stored in a shed by the beach in Florida, it's not going to last very long at all. But in general, lower voltage, lower heat, less stress on the component's life. Let's see. Hey, Andre from Brazil. Just got a used Fruman Runt 50. Don't know if it's possible to control both channels and the boost with the foot switch or a switcher like Boss ES5. Cheers from Brazil. I believe it's designed. I mean, it is foot switchable. I don't recall whether it's a stereo jack or two individual foot switches for the two different functions. It's been a while since I had the Runt 50 on the tape on the channel. Either way, you should be able to control it with a foot switch. Let me look up that amp real quick and just look at the back of it. I think I'm right. Let's see. Let's see here. Just a second. My hidden window. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. There it is. All right. So I'm trying to get a picture of the damn rear of the amp. Sorry. I know this makes for exciting videos. Doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-boo. All right. I'm not sure if you can switch the boost, but it shows that it has a foot switch. So I don't know whether it needs to be mono or stereo. But Dave does. So contact Dave, and he's real good at replying to all these things, and he will certainly know. But I saw that he sells a single foot switch for the Runt 50. So you may have the choice of boost or not manually, but change channels with the foot switch. Hey, Canal, I'm glad that helped you. Yeah, the cause of the decrease in headroom in the effects loop was the reverb pedal. Yeah, some reverb pedals are fine to be used in the effects loop. Some of them you have to switch. Some of them aren't, and some of them you have to calibrate. So, like the old Boss stuff used to be that you had to calibrate it. The newer stuff runs it both, and a really old stuff just falls apart with any line level stuff. Hey, Alexander, the most common things are if the baffle is loose, the screws holding the baffle to the cabinet, or if the speakers are loose on the baffle, followed by any other hardware associated with the amp, including like the tilt back legs on a lot of Fender combos. And then there can be issues inside the chassis that only exhibit themselves when being vibrated by a speaker, but they don't show on a bench. One of the things I use, it's too far for me to get right now, but I use an electronic toothbrush. It's an old one, and I will use the back of the toothbrush head, not the brushes, but just the plastic, because that thing will vibrate the hell out of things. You can move it all around because you cannot tap at anything at any speed resembling that of an audio frequency. The fastest tapper in the world might get to 20 hertz if they're really good, but that thing will just go bzzz, and you hold it against things, and if you hear it coming out of the speakers, you found a place where it is sensitive to vibrations. All right, we are coming up. We're just a little bit past the hour, so we're going to do another 7-minute intermission, and then we will resume. So everyone go get a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do, and I'll see you in just a little bit. If I can find my button. All right, so I came back a little bit early since I made you wait a little bit long last time. Let's see if we can rock through these questions. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Might be out of a guitar amp. Can you recommend a mix preamp that I think is good? I'm not sure what you're asking about. Can you rephrase that? I'll look for it. Mic preamp. There are a lot of great mic preamps out there. Depends on what you need it to do. Do you need it to be coloration? Do you need it to be, are you recording classical piano music and you need to have zero noise? Or are you trying to make your vocals sing? So the answer might be something from Great River. If you want something that's beautiful and pretty transparent, might want to look into the various Neve options or API options if you want to get some color in a cool way for vocals and electric guitar. And if you're looking for something really good at a low price point, maybe the RNP from FMR Audio would be a good choice. I don't know what your budget is or what you are looking to do. I have to admit that having owned all those things back in the past, what I'm using is a Motu M2, and I use that for my voice, and I use that for all the guitar amp stuff. And it's a very good mic pre, considering that it's built into a USB converter thing. It's a good interface to have for basic needs, and it may be all you need. But if you're really looking for a great mic preamp, that's certainly not the answer. But at which point you need to make sure you have, if you have an interface to go into a computer, that it needs to be a very transparent interface because the mic pre is doing all the magic. Hey, Lorenzo. He's got a 57 twin amp reissue in Rome, and now he lives in LA and bought a Bassman 59 reissue. Would be worth bringing back the twin to LA and swapping the transformer for US voltage. Well, if you're planning on not going back to Italy, then certainly. But other than that, they're very, very similar amplifiers, except for the output section and the speakers. So I would imagine that most people would just want to say, all right, now we get a 2x12 and figure out how to run the Bassman reissue into the 2x12 to get that twin sound. Now, the issue, of course, as you know, is with a 59 reissue Bassman, you've got 4 RCA plugs, one to each speaker, versus just a 1/4-inch plug like you would find in a Super Reverb that then splits to all 4 speakers. So it's trickier, but it could be done. You could have a single RCA, disconnect all 4 of the RCAs from the Bassman, and then just have one RCA connection going to a 2x12 cab. But if you have the money to have it flown over, maybe the best bet would be to, if you want to have the amp sent to you in LA, and then just get a step-down transformer. So, rather a step-up transformer for about $80-$90, rather than modify the amp. That way, if you ever need to use it again in Europe, you're set. And you could use that with any other amps. All right, Kyle Driscoll had a Tweaker 88 with transformer issues. I forgot about the Tweaker 88. Yeah, usually I see the 15s and the 40s. I forgot the 88 existed. It seems to me that the issue was that the people who made that power transformer spec'd out the same transformer for Japanese voltage, which is 100 volts, and US voltage was 120, and it worked fine for Japan voltage. It didn't work so well with American voltage, so they really should have spec'd out a difference, but they didn't. So, and that's not a reflection on the designer, which was Bruce Egnater. It was the people who actually built the amp after Bruce sold the company. Let's see. Chris Russell, I think you're going to love the AC30C2. They're really great amps. Just know that the tubes that they ship with are not that great to begin with, and they have traveled several thousand miles before they get to you. So a lot of times, if you have one of the newer Voxes, you will you will absolutely hear a benefit from upgrading the tubes, and even just a set of JJs. Again, with a lot of Voxes and Marshalls, V2, so if you're looking at the rear of the amp, the second tube from your left, is a cathode follower, so you don't want to use a Russian tube there if you can avoid it. So even if you go all Russian tubes for everything else, V2 should be Chinese or Slovenian. So say a tube amp Doctor made in China, or a JJ, which is made in Slovenia, because they can handle the voltage on the cathode follower. And I meant to pop you up on the screen there, Chris. Sorry, I forgot until the last second. Thoughts on the Princeton studio recording amp? Yeah, it was an all right amp, but I thought the recording feature was both not as useful as you would want, and also very poorly designed as far as heat goes. It does fail because it is doing current to heat transformations to bring down the level. And in today's market, where you could get a speaker emulator with IRs for like $300, I think the very overkill 90s approach is not the best way to do it. Hey, Paul. Yeah, sometimes the contact cleaner is an important thing. Even a cheap watch has battery contacts, and they will get corroded, and you just clean those contacts, and bam, it works again, which is cool. Hey, Daniel, I don't know that I have had one Vibranto, but it was in bad shape. I've not heard a working Vibranto speaker, in good condition, so I don't have an opinion other than the one that was in there. We replaced with Celestion or Warehouse, I don't recall which. So I get to hear and have experience with an awful lot of things, but not everything. Hey, JMFD, thank you very much. He's an old vintage amp guy, but he gave in and bought a Tone Master Pro. He's thinking of building his own dual speaker 12 and 10-inch Tweed cab. Any suggestions on a solid state amp build to drive it? Wow. No, I don't know I don't know what plans there are out there for very solid state models. I'm trying to think. All right, here's the answer. If you're up to it and you can find the parts, because a lot of the best solid state stuff was designed using components that have not been made in 30, 40 years and are very hard to source. But if you could make some version of a Gibson Lab Series amp, like an L4 or L6, that is a fantastic sounding amplifier when it works. The trouble is it has this compressor limiter chip in there, which is just about impossible to find, and it's a very complicated circuit. But when they work, they sound fantastic. Hey, Joe, stop. Filtering should take care of it. And if the filtering doesn't take care of it, see my earlier comment in the first hour about grounds on Marshalls. I think you've seen that. But it's not a matter of just checking them for continuity. The meter will beep even if you have a bad ground. Hey, Jason, thank you very much. Who makes a good output transformer for a late 60s Valco 5-watt single-ended guitar amp? Any output transformer designed for a champ will be fine. You can get a Mercury, you can get a Haber, you can get a what's the word I'm looking for? Canadian brand, Hammond. But yeah, any any output transformer sold for a Fender Champ will be fine. It's probably a 6v6 anyway. And then some of them you can choose whether you want to run it like 5K or 7K, and there's no wrong answer there. Just figure out, try each and see which one sounds better if either. Thank you, Martin. Good to see you. Hey, GC, besides the deluxe reverb from 69, can you also interchange 5U4 GB from late 69 to early 70s Princeton Super Reverbs to GZ34? Yes, thank you very much. Absolutely you can. All those models shipped from the factory with the exact same power transformers. So a 67 Super Reverb that shipped with the GZ34 uses the same power transformers in 1972 that might have used the 5U4 GB. I think that the reason that Fender switched from the GZ34 to the 5U4 GB was that US wall voltages were going up. And with the power transformers that they were using, the heater supply came up, the B plus came up, and the amps were just running too hot. And they could either they could change all the power supplies, which was very expensive, or they could just switch rectifiers because the GZ34 the 5U4 GB drops about 30 volts more than a GZ34. So, all right, we brought our B plus back to how it was done when the amp was designed in 1963, and just bias for that. So, if you change from 5U4 to GZ34, rebias, and vice versa. But the power transformer will run a little bit warmer with the 5U4 GB because it does have more current draw, but the amp itself will run cooler. So it's a trade-off, but it's a trade-off well within the safe margins of all those things. A good power transformer can operate safely for hours and days at a temperature that's uncomfortable to touch. It should not make your skin sizzle, but that's too hot for me to keep my hand on it for more than 5 seconds. That transformer's fine. JJs are really good tubes if they don't lose vacuum. Some JJs, and this period seems to have passed, but for a while JJs were coming that were losing vacuum if you looked at them too hard. That seems to be an issue with the glass. It seems to be resolved. JJs are really shat upon in the forums because they're not expensive. And that's not the right way to look at that. They're good tubes, and they sound better than a tube which is not functioning correctly. Never spend money on Gold Lions or any of that stuff. A Gold Lion is just some other tube brand that's been put in a black box and upcharged to you because it has a new box and promises cryogenic blah, blah, blah. Gold Lion is not a tube manufacturer. Gold Lion buys a tube from a tube manufacturer, has them print Gold Lion on it. Tells you that it has magical metallurgical properties because it's been flash frozen, much like a French fry, and then they charge more because it goes in a prettier box. Same thing for the Black Sable stuff. It's just garbage. Don't waste your money on that. And you don't need gold pins on a tube, and a guitar amp makes no difference. Hey, Alex, I don't do a lot of lead-free soldering. From what I know, Chip Quick is the preferential choice, but it's not for lead-free. It's for surface mount stuff. For lead-free, I would go to a Kester lead-free solder, but Brad probably has more experience with that than I do, so maybe Brad will answer that for you. I'm working pretty much exclusively on tube amps these days. Not a lot of surface mount stuff, and given my choice, I'll remove the old lead-free stuff and put in leaded solder because my work does not need to be exported to France. My stuff needs to work. When it leaves this bench, it needs to be rock solid. And as of yet, lead-free is not as solder. Lead-free solder is not as reliable and predictably reliable as leaded. So I use leaded. I'm trying to keep the lead out of the landfill by keeping the amp out of the landfill. It's a good mop, Kyle. It's a good mop. Spatula City. Let's see. Sam, I'm sorry to say this, but I'd rather listen to anything on Spotify today than listen to anything the Dead ever did. I just cannot stand the Grateful Dead. They sound like if the Muppet Band didn't know the song. I know I'm in the minority there. I just can't deal with the Dead. Milo says, listen to Sierra Farrell. Richard says, listen to X. I've never been a big fan of X, but I respect them. You don't need to worry about oxidation with aluminum chassis. Where to go, David S. Aluminum doesn't oxidize, but you do need to worry about if you have steel contacting the aluminum. When you have dissimilar metals, you can have issues. But usually if you just get it really clean and tight and then seal it against oxygen, it can add decades to the reliability of a connection. And the sealing it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Clear nail polish buys an awful lot of goodness. Yeah, the Fiona Apple stuff I heard, it was interesting. The vocals sounded one take off the cuff, very experimental. It was very, let's just do this thing. The piano playing is fantastic. I haven't looked up to see if it's her, if she's doing stuff with John Bryan again or whatever. The drumming sounded like Matt Chamberlain. So it's interesting. It's this very in-the-moment, live, spontaneous, warts and all, but at the same time, the drums have that whole Matt Chamberlain just beautiful sound where everything breathes. So. Yeah, I always liked Roy Orbison too, Martin. He's a two-trick pony, but man, he pulled off those two tricks so well. Let's see. Oh, come on, Mark Spurgeon. Rap is cool too. Any creative means of expression can be awesome and can be used to sell soap. So it's not a style or genre issue. There are experiences we have on this planet that are best expressed in one form or another, and I don't look for them all to be the same. Christian asks, how does output transformer impedance affect a train wreck? Expresses touch sensitivity and breakup, and why do Kingfisher prefer Pacific transformers? Well, you're not going to hear much difference between 6 point something and 5 point something K, but you'll hear a little bit. It's something that's more measurable. Touch sensitivity is more of the fact that Ken didn't use grid stoppers on the input. Breakup, when you have the impedance, the primary impedance of an output transformer with a given set of tubes is going to affect how much they compress, how efficient they are, how clean they are. But it's not one little thing. You look at a train wreck, you got to look at the filtering, you got to look at the lack of grid stoppers, you got to look at the insane amount of gain, how that gain is introduced, where it's introduced, what the frequency response to that gain is, et cetera, the amount of negative feedback or none. It's not one thing. Why did Kingfisher prefer Pacific transformers? Maybe he was friends with the guy at Pacific. Maybe he just had good luck with them. Maybe he got special rates for the mail. Maybe they're the best thing out there after he tried everything. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for Ken. I have followed him in two Fenders, and at least on those two amps, I was not massively overwhelmed by the quality of the work that he did. But he certainly is. No one talks about the Caldwell Master Volume. Everyone talks about the Fisher Master Volume. Blah blah blah. I think he did very good work at a time when it was new for people to be known for doing that kind of work. And I know that he was, at the golden era of vintage guitar magazine and stuff like that. I'm not criticizing him, but I think there are certain aspects of the guitar world that overinflate what Ken was doing, what Dumble was doing, and I think the real geniuses are the Don Randalls and Leo Fenders, who said, "Yeah, okay, let's make thousands of these things, not a few dozen. Let's make thousands of these things at a point where people can afford to buy them and have them be just better than everything else on the market. Because if you look at, say, a 1964 twin reverb and look at every other amplifier on the market in 1964, there's just no comparison. No comparison. Go back to 57, 56, pretty much from when Fender started the C series of Tweed amps, the gauntlet was put down and no other company came close until Hiwatt came out. And Hiwatt never made thousands of amps that people could afford. Now it was really hard in the 60s and 70s for any UK company to compete with Fender because of distribution. The Marshalls and stuff were so expensive when imported. But it doesn't impress me as much if a small shop like Dumble or Fisher did a few dozen amazing amps that cost an awful lot of money that were getting bought by rock stars. And it really amazes me that I have a constant stream of 50s through 70s Fenders that come through this shop. And when they're done and put back to how they were designed to be, they're phenomenal. And I don't think that any one of you playing, say, this 65 Super Reverb when it's restored versus a Dumble or Two Rock would be able to say, oh, that's the real expensive new amp, and that's the old amp. They feel a little bit different from each other, but if John Mayer were to do his next record with this and this, we couldn't afford this anymore. So, John Mayer, if you watch this, no offense, but don't play old Super Reverbs in public, ever, please. The rest of us need them. How about Molly Tuttle or Billy Strings? I appreciate their talent, William. I don't enjoy their music very much. It's I don't know, if I want to listen to bluegrass country stuff, I'm going to go more Alison Krauss. I like vocals more. The Chicks, Tuttle and Strings. I don't know. There's a lot of bluegrass stuff where they have amazing chops when they're playing over the same 3-chord progression for forever. It gets a little bit dull to me. No, that's not always the case. For those of you who know Strength in Numbers, that thing that was happening with Sam Bush and Mark Rice and Bella Fleck about 1990, 91, there's some really cool stuff out there. But in general, bluegrass, I get bored with the structure. I don't like listening to much blues unless it's just phenomenal, because the structure is usually pretty boring. It's like Howlin' Wolf could sing over one chord, and John, Hooker actually did, and it sounds phenomenal. But if I listen to like the blues station on the radio, and it's like another jumped up, predictable 12-bar blues, kind of shuffling. I've heard that so many times, and it doesn't have the impact. There are exceptions like the Tedeschi trucks where the emotion is there as well, but it's so formulaic. Hey, Thomas and Carlos, just so everyone can say they hear a difference between Blue Astra versus Mustard and the other cap in the preamp factor myth. Well, yeah, people say it all the time. People obviously can say that they hear a difference all the time. I think a few people have done a blind test, and I have done blind tests. And in my own blind tests of comparing different capacitor materials and types, there are places in some circuits where there is a difference, and there are places in the circuits where there's not a difference. And the trouble is, then you have to have, say, if there are 13 capacitors in the amp, you've got to have 26 or 39 capacitors up in the air with little switches, so you can do all kinds of random permutations and see if you can consistently pick it out, 8 out of 10 times, or whether I heard a little difference here, I didn't hear a difference here, but if I do both, then I do hear a cumulative difference. And in general, I have found that people like to spend money on things that are pretty. I like to spend money, my clients' money, on things which sound good and are mechanically well built. For instance, I prefer, say, the Vishay MKT 1813 series to the Mallory 150 series, primarily because they are prettier, and the client likes that. But the leads are thicker and less wobbly because the thin leads just don't give as good a mechanical connection. Both of the caps sound almost identical. I think that for most places, if you have a 400 volt cap and there's 300 something volts there, it's a bad idea. 600 the vertical 30 volt caps are the way to go. For most amplifiers that are there to introduce a distortion, I find that polyester cumulatively, like 13 caps versus one cap test, cumulatively, polyester sounds more appropriate in most amps, and that's what most of those old amps used, whether it's a Vox or a Marshall with the mustards, or the WEMAs in some old Voxes, or the blue molded Ajaxes in a Fender. Those are all polyester caps. Polypropylene caps have cumulatively a little less hair of the dog. I prefer the sound of a good ceramic disc cap to a good silver mica. Most silver micas out there are not as good. I also like the sound of multi-layered ceramics, the dip stuff, and I love the sound of the polystyrenes, but they're so prone to being microphonic, so expensive, and are physically so flimsy that I rarely use them. But again, I'm working in guitar amps. If this were for hi-fi, if I was doing a high-end audio reproduction systems, I'd be going to the polypropylenes. I'd be going to the polystyrenes, et cetera, et cetera. The game changes when you're trying to minimize distortion versus when you're trying to say this is the right kind of distortion. And a very high-quality polystyrene or very high-quality silver mica will have less distortion than a Class 2 ceramic. So there are real differences, but most of the people discussing them online are exaggerating them to make them these huge things. But it's not like I changed out this one cap and the amp sucked, or I changed out this one cap and the amp came alive. That's what people on the forums talk about. No, I'm talking about every cap in the Super Reverb. I'm not going to count them right now, but it's, let's compare these 20 caps to these 20 caps to these 20 caps. After first having gone through and measured them all, making sure that they're all 22 nanofarad and all 47 nanofarad, and I'm doing apples to apples, and where the only variation that we can control is the material. So again, I think beyond a certain point, this falls in the category of no one wants to spend time buying and using metronomes, but they'll spend hours thinking about this stuff. I have not tried any solid-state tube replacements because the only one that's ever come on the market was supposed to be the new tube. Was that Roland had, and I've not seen that, and it's certainly not something that I could put into here. And there's some Russian company that was playing around with some chip that was going to go into a 12AX7 socket, but I don't think anything ever happened to that. Let's see. Mad Cow has been happy with the results of the new Jensen P10R in a Princeton and Vibrolux. I've had some really good sounding 10-inch Jensens come in through. I'm trying to remember. There was one that was really awful. I can't remember what it was, but the R's are pretty good. In general, the new Italian Jensens are good speakers. Some of them are just very, very bright. When we're talking about the Aunicas, when we're talking about the ceramics, Jensen's got a lot of great speakers, but of course Fender goes for the C12K, which is terrible. The C12K is a horrible speaker. The C12N is phenomenal, but they're still a little bit brighter than they used to be. Let's see. Trying to Oh, the Jack White thing does have axial. I thought I saw it had radials. Sorry, Brad, because a lot of the newer stuff they're doing with the double-sided boards are using radials. Let's see. Yeah, BC Electronics, the Bogner Alchemist is always going to have issues. Sorry. I'm not a fan of the VHTs that are made in China. And it's not because of China, but because they're made very inexpensively, and I've had bad experience with them. The old VHT stuff that Steve was making was very good, but it's very different. The company is very different. Do boutique caps degrade quicker by constantly safety draining them and recharging over and over? No, but boutique caps are going to be typically coupling caps, film caps, not electrolytics, so that you don't need to drain them over and over again. It's fun sometimes to charge one up and toss to your buddy. I don't do that. No, I'm kidding. I don't have any friends. Let's see. Let's see. Hey, Dave, I might have a video up on a ProSonic. I don't remember. I don't care for the model. They has some really weird reverb stage noise issues, but I'm not sure if I have a video up or not. If I might have one up, I don't recall. I'm sorry. They're not built too dissimilarly from other Fenders of that era. Trying to get through to any other questions. Apparently I sounded sarcastic. What are the odds of that? CM Magisterium, I'm sure he's gone for 40 minutes by the time I said that. Let's see. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Let's see. On your 69 champ, he likes the range of tones when he turns everything up to 9. The clean tones are better than just turning down the amp. Is always running the tubes hot going to damage anything? Yeah, the tubes won't last as long, but that's what they're there for. They're there to make music. So don't, if you like the music that they make, they're doing their job, and it's a champ. It's mostly just going to be the power tube, and you can buy a pair of 6v6s and a champ. Those two 6v6s should probably last you 10 years because you only use one, then you swap out to the other one. Let's see. Hey, Des, that's good. Oh, sorry, sent to me. That's good. Yeah. I'm glad that Steve is sending you the. I could not find what you're talking about with the twist-on jack nut for the PS100, but I'm glad it worked. But I looked at the picture of the PS100 rear jacks, and I didn't see anything unusual about the nuts on them. So, but I'm glad that Steve was able to take care of you. I had a feeling he would. All right, now we're back to Des. If the effects loop is after the phase inverter, it's not. You're thinking about driving the said phase inverter with the channel volume cranked using a passive attenuator as a master volume. The phase inverter is always going to be after any master volume in an amp because that's how phase inverters work. They take an incoming signal and they split it to two copies, each of which is out of phase with each other, and those feed the two different sides of the output tubes. So after the phase inverter, you cannot have an effects loop unless you're to have an effects loop on this positive waveform and an effects loop on this negative waveform. So that you're always going to have the phase inverter after the effects loop. The only issue is whether you have a master volume before the effects loop or master volume after the effects loop. Either of those master volume locations and the effects loop will be before the phase inverter. So but it's a so you're looking at the channel on your amp. You've got a channel volume and you've got the gain. So the channel volume is the master volume for that channel. I think you're overthinking this, Des. Let's see. Oh, Rob, that's so kind of you. Thank you very much. That's very nice of you. Let's see. The only guy I know in that area is Chris Church in Hamilton, but Chris does fantastic work, Matt Schul. But if anyone else knows of a good tech around Toronto, let Matt know. But Chris is about as good as it gets. Hey, Pastor Bent on it. Yeah, I'm glad that your build came together. The bright channel is more fun, and I wonder if it's a tag gainer because of that cap. Yeah, it's got a little more gain because of that cap. Because above X frequency, the gain, the volume isn't being turned down as much. Um, you know, I think it's a fantastic amp. I'm glad you're happy with it. The one thing I would suggest to anyone building a 5E3 is the amp often in kit form uses a 12AX7 for V1. The original used a 12AY7. So get a 12AY and play around with that as well. It's a very different feeling responding amp with a 12AY than the 12AX7. Both are safe. The 12AY is vintage correct, but if you prefer the sound of the 12AX, that's correct as well. But it is nice to be able to have, change one $20 tube and get a different feel and response from the amp. Okay, you got the AY, good. Well, now stick in an AX and see what you think, because AX is cool as well, but very different. Well, S. McDonald, I got to tell you, I wouldn't advise you to upgrade anything on a Pro Junior. I would say sell it before it catches on fire because it's going to fail. They're built really horribly. Don't buy a second one unless you just have money to burn. It's if you look inside at how it's built, it's just insulting compared to what a Champ or Princeton used to be. And and it sounds so bad through the stock speaker because the cab is just so small. Even if you run the output into a different cab, it's a better sounding amp. But I hate to shit on your parade, but I can't recommend that anyone put any money into a Pro Junior. Was there any other countries other than the USA or the UK making great amps back in the day? I don't know. I'd say that Trainer knows. I'd add Canada to that list. But in general, I think since the music that was being amplified came primarily from the United States and then from the UK, that was where the need for the loud amplification came. I'm sure that there were companies in France and Italy and Germany and Japan. And I know that there's some stuff in the late 60s starting in Australia, but also know that getting the parts and transformers and stuff was a bit odd when everything was done in-house, when things couldn't be imported. I think just given the nature of the Industrial Revolution and how radio and television and all that developed, and then World War II, and what was going on in the rest of Europe, what was going on in Japan, I think the United States and the UK and Canada just had a serious leg up. So it's not go USA, every other country sucks. But if you're building a company in 1950, look at the cars at the time. Aside from some of the German cars, Mercedes, for instance. But yeah, I think their economies were still focused on rebuilding their countries more than dominating the world with electronics. Such is it is what it is. But I don't think any other country ever had anything quite as forward thinking as Fender. I mean, Fender was just such a shot across the bow to the entire guitar industry. Let's see. Hey, Steve Smith, shoot me an email and we'll get in touch. Yeah, if you're just outside, we can get something going on that the reissues are easy to work on. Let's see. Trying to make sure I get as many questions as possible in this last 8-9 minutes. And at 4 o'clock, a little 20-minute video I uploaded this morning is going to go live, and it is part 2 of the grounding series. It's only been a couple of years since part 1 came out, but part 1 was on Marshalls. What's going to drop in 8 minutes is part 2, vintage fenders and ground schemes. So if you're not tired of my dulcet tones after this, check that out. And Brad, are you going to be doing a stream today after this? So get in the queue here, Brad, if you're going to be talking, because I'll send people your way as well. All right. Chris R. says on his 79 Vibrolux reverb, if I line up the knobs at 1, then the pots and knob will turn beyond the 10 notch on the dial. Is it a 70s knob thing? Okay, well, that's just imprecision on the print. So no stream at Brad's today. Okay. Well, to watch my video, then I'll go for a walk, get some fresh air. But basically, if it's I line them all up at 1 because that's at least they're all consistent. So it doesn't matter if they're all perfectly aligned in terms of what would be ideal. They're all the same. So you know that 5.5 is the same on each in terms of o'clock position. And at that point, you turn from there. It's fine if it goes just beyond the 10 notch on the dial. Or you can set them all so that the 10 lines up and the 1 will be a little bit off. I just wanted them all to be consistent. I wouldn't waste deoxit on guitar strings. Deoxit's expensive stuff. Guitar strings, even if you keep them as clean as possible, they're still going to get little micro dents in them and the intonation goes out. I mean, I change strings on each guitar once a month. If I were playing out, I'd change every couple of days. I just clean them before you put the guitar away if you worry about it. I don't ever clean the damn things. I'm going to change them out anyway. But I wouldn't waste deoxit on guitar strings. Deoxit's expensive and probably not too good for us. I don't think we need to absorb too much of it through our skin. Nice blues in background. Is that sunshine? Well, yeah. It's a little bit of daylight leaking through the blinds in there, but it looks bluer than it is because I've got the this light set to 3200 Kelvin, and I've got the camera set appropriately, so I looked balanced, which makes the 5600K behind me from the daylight in the other room and the lights back there go very, very blue. So I didn't want to do the YouTube channel RGB lights thing, but I wanted a little bit of the contrast between my skin and the background. And it's an easy way to get a look, without, I'm not going to be doing any color weirdness live in a live stream. I'm going to be doing any processing or anything. So it's just a camera color temperature trick. I have no idea why anyone would be interested in the PV Decade, Alex. Sorry. I'm going to try to get the rest of the questions in the last 5 minutes. So if I don't put them up on the screen, it's just because to save time. 6-string Kaiju, the Bella 44 is totally worth the $2,000 price. Yeah, it's a fantastic amp. Fantastic amp, yeah. So Brad's got some lead solder listed there, and yeah, the good stuff is expensive, but it's not as good as the lead-free stuff, as the leaded stuff. But let's see. Let's see. We're getting there. We might get through all the questions. Reggie Young is fantastic, Rex. Yeah, John Lee Hooker wasn't limited to 12 bars. But then again, like Willie, he just couldn't count. Let's see. I use .031 for solder, Allen, and then when I need more, I'll double it up and twist it. I'll buy the roll of this .062 from time to time as well, but I find the .031 just works really well. But yeah, again, I'll bend it back on itself and twist it, and then I've got the .062. Yeah, Shaky Pete. If I'm making a channel of a deluxe reverb into the super reverb channel, the only difference between the deluxe reverb normal channel and the super reverb normal channel is the mids resistor is a 22 nanofarad in a super. So I change it to 22, and there it is. Let's see. Mikkel, removing the bright cap and changing the speaker will not give you a ground hum. Either made a mistake and touched something you should not have touched, changed something you didn't intend to change, or it is a coincidence that you have a ground hum. Of course, did you not have a ground hum before and you were using both amps? Because usually when you run two amps at the same time, you're going to have a ground loop regardless of whether it has a bright cap or not. That's why we have ABY boxes with ground lifts on the B. I don't think that it has. If literally all you did was remove the bright cap and change the speaker, that would have nothing to do with it. I don't think I'm blurry, but I didn't see it go blurry. Thank you, Thomas. That's very kind of you. Let's see. What's the deal with paper Noah caps? All right, Jerry. Well, they're garbage. There's nothing. They're fine. They're not garbage. They'll work fine in a tone circuit. There's no voltage present, but it's just a way to get $28 per cap out of someone. It's total sales. You won't hear any difference. It's ridiculous. When I mentioned before that different cap materials can have very subtle differences in an amplifier, I'm talking with high voltages present. With no voltages present, no current present, and a simple passive network, as long as the capacitance is the same, you're going to have the same sound. So, all right, trying to make sure. I think I've got just about everyone I can get at this point. If I missed your question, I apologize. I appreciate you being here. And again, in just about a minute, we're going to have the ground schemes for Vintage Fenders video going live. So check that out if that's of interest to you. And I appreciate each one of you for being here. And I'll see you next time. Sayonara.